The original name of this movie was called The Body, which was based on a novella from a collection of short stories called Different Seasons by Stephen King, and we renamed it Stand By Me. And you'll hear the strains of the music Stand By Me right here at the beginning. And we had decided on the music Stand By Me before we came up with the title. This music was always intended to be in the film, and then the title came from that. Here we see Richard Dreyfuss, and initially we shot this sequence with a different actor named David Duke, and he was very good in the part, but as you'll see, that the majority of what this role is about narration and voiceover, and David just didn't have the right kind of voice for this, and I actually revoiced the voiceover with many actors. I tried Michael McKean, Ted Bessel, a number of actors, and then Rick Dreyfuss came in, who's an old friend of mine. We went to high school together, and when he did the voiceover, it just clicked and was perfect. And then I asked him if he would agree to reshoot the opening sequence, and he agreed to do that. Here's Will Wheaton, who plays Gordy. And I think that of all four of the actors that we had, we probably found the only actors who could have done these parts. Of all the people that auditioned, these were the only ones that we could find that really were right for these parts. Will had an intelligence and a sensitivity that was perfect for this part. And you'll see the other actors as well were also totally suited for what they did. The music in the film, Rockin' Robin here, and all the music were all my favorites during the 50s, so I picked a lot of the songs that were my favorites, and this one, related to Rocked in the Treetops, and here they are playing in their treehouse. Will Wheaton, as I said, and here we have River Phoenix, who was great in this part. There's an interesting story to be told about him at the end of the film, which I'll mention when we get to it. Of course, Corey Feldman was the only one who came into, as Rick says, the craziest guy we hung around. He was the only one that had the anger at age 12 and going on 13 when we made this film. He was the only one that came in that had the rage and the anger to be able to play this part. Now here they're smoking cigarettes, and you just want to let everybody know, because I'm the one that everybody talks about who raised cigarette taxes. This was not real cigarettes; these were lettuce leaves that they used, and it's not real tobacco. Here's Jerry O'Connell, who, when he came to audition for the part, had never acted before in his life, had only done one commercial. And after he finished his performance in the audition, he walked out and came back and he says, "Hey, aren't you the guy on Channel 5? The All in the Family reruns were playing in New York City." And that's what he knew me as, the guy on Channel 5. And he was so natural that I said he had to do the part. That plus he recognized me in All in the Family. This sequence here was one of the funniest, where Vern is trying to find the pennies that he buried and couldn't figure out where they were. And this was a big lighting problem because it was very dark underneath this house. We had built it on a soundstage, and we wanted to sell the idea of all these holes that he had dug up, but at the same time make it natural. So it was probably a little bit overlit, but we had to sell the joke. The screenplay, which got nominated for an Academy Award, was written, adapted by Bruce Evans and Ray Gideon, but it was very faithfully taken from the novella by Stephen King, and a lot of the dialogue was taken right out of the novella. The thing that I did with the film was to refocus the picture onto Gordy and make it Gordy's story. In the short story, he was mostly an observer, just a kind of arm's length observer. But when we restructured the film, I felt that he was the one that should be focused in on, and it was a way for me to play out my own feelings about feeling disconnected with my parents and getting strength from my friends and finding that strength that allowed me to feel good about myself. I mean, the interesting thing about Stand By Me is that it's a coming-of-age story for young boys, 12 going on 13, when that really critical time in their lives. But in a weird way, it was a coming-of-age for me as a person, because it was the first time in my life that I started feeling good about myself and feeling good that I was doing the kinds of things that I felt I was capable of doing in show business, having been an extension of my father and doing similar work to the kind of work my father had done. Stand By Me was the first film that I made that I felt was truly reflective of my personality, an extension of my personality, And the fact that it was accepted ultimately made me feel very good about myself and sent me in a direction that I've gone since then, and I've made my choices much more connected to who I am than like I say, being an extension of my father. These feelings of being not seen by the parents was feelings that I've had in my life growing up, and that's why I say this was much of a coming of age for me as it was for the young boys in the film. And what Gordy is going through and feeling that he's not being recognized by his parents here because they're going through difficult times are feelings that I have felt myself, and I very much related to Gordy's character, and it was what allowed me to be able to tell the film in as personal a way as I did. I was very lucky to get John Cusack to play this part. He had made a film with me called The Sure Thing, and I had become good friends with him, and he's a wonderful actor, and this is a small part, but I needed somebody to make a big impression in a small part because this is the guy that little Gordy looked up to, his big brother. And so to get somebody like John was really special because he made a real good impression in a short time on screen. And this, of course, is Marshall Bell, who played his father and did a great job. Marshall's very subdued in this film, but in real life he's an insane person, and don't let him tell you otherwise. I don't usually talk about technical things, but this is a very long lens that we used on that previous shot, and we used it a couple of times in places in the film that were kind of effective. It kind of gives this kind of gauzy, distancy kind of feel for a nostalgic piece. This lady's named Madeline Swift, and she was my assistant in the early 80s. It's interesting, you watch a film like this, and it really is like home movies for me. It brings back all kinds of memories, and you think more about the things that happened to you during the making of the film than you do about the actual film itself. Pinky swear was a thing that I used to do as a kid, and a lot of the little things that happened in this film, the little, rank outs of the mother and two for flinching and pinky swear, all these are things that I used to do as a kid. This takes place in '59 when Gordy is 12 and I was 12 in 1959. Of course, here's Kiefer Sutherland, and he was brilliant in this part. He's a wonderful actor, and I think it was one of the best things he's done. He was, I think, 17 years old, or 17 or 18 when we made this film. Now here comes a little move that I used to do to my friends all the time. I stuck in, watch his leg, kick him in the ass. I used to do that all the time with my friends. We were lucky. We shot this up in Oregon, and it rains a lot there, but we shot this over a 60-day period, and we had 60 straight days of sunshine every single day. And the film only takes place in over a 2-day period, so we needed that consistency. Now here they're singing Have Gun Will Travel, which is another thing that I used to do. I used to sing the theme songs to all these 50s television shows, and to this day I can sing all the theme songs to 50s television shows. So it came in, all this useless information came in handy in making this film. What's interesting about this is even though it takes place in a rural area, people from inner city say that they relate to this film because it's the feelings and the relationships of the four boys that they connect up with. And everybody can remember those gangs that they used to hang around with when they were 12 years old and the friends they had, regardless of what the setting was. So it had a universal feel because of, like I say, the way the boys connected with each other. Now here's a great sequence that we had, which is the train dodge. And this was an interesting sequence to shoot. And you'll see that we use some long lenses in this again because it compresses the space between the train and the boys. So never at any time would the train anywhere close to the boys, but it makes it look like it is because we use long lenses on the camera. See, that's a long lens shot, and that train is very, very far away, but it makes it look like it's a lot closer. And this is something we used to do too, which was slapping somebody some skin. And that's another thing we used to always do when we were kids at this age in the 50s. And if you look closely in this next shot, on Vern's ankle, his radio mic is flopping there on his left ankle. There it is. You can see it right there. We always had trouble with Jerry O'Connell. He was always getting into scrapes during the film. This was taken from something that Ray Gideon talked about, one of the writers, Ray, who talked about when he was raised on an Indian reservation. This is a game that they used to play, mailbox baseball, which is against the law, and we actually had to put a disclaimer at the end of the film letting everybody know that it was against the law. That was a line we used to say all the time. So funny, I forgot to laugh. We took all these phrases that we used as kids then and we threw them into the film. You can hear Rick Dreyfuss's voice over there is so perfect. He has just this kind of cynical, satirical twinge to his voiceover, and it was just perfect for the film. He had a dramatic edge. He also had a satiric edge and a nostalgic edge, and all those things mixed together made it perfect. Actually, Will Wheaton could run faster, I think, than River Phoenix. And he says, well, how can I run, make it look like I'm trying to run fast, but I'm not really running fast? I said, you got to pump your arms a lot and make it look like you're running and make your legs move in place a little, not take such big strides. So he had to fake running the way he did to lose that race. You know, I look at this scene and it reminds me of how, you know, these young boys had never really had much experience acting. And when we started the film, before we started, we did 2 weeks of rehearsal where we actually did acting classes and acting exercises to get them to learn, actually teach them about acting and to make these scenes seem ensemble and to make them be able to work with each other. And of course, here they are ranking out each other's mother, which is, as Rick Dreyfuss points out, was something we all did with each other's mothers. We always made fun of each other's mothers. This is Bruce Kirby, who's Bruno Kirby's father, was a good friend. All of these little flashback sequences had a nice feel to it cinematically. They were always kind of a little blown out. You can see it's a little overlit and kind of gauzy and, like I say, a little blown out. And it had a kind of nice quality that I liked. That whole sequence is interesting because it shows how the dynamic of a family can be changed, obviously, greatly with one person leaving and dying like that, and how that, in this case, Gordy's older brother, served almost as a buffer to him, between him and his parents, and it was very hard on him after his brother died. You'll see in this next sequence, Corey Feldman, who plays Teddy Duchamp, is wonderful in this scene. It's the scene that we auditioned him with and realized that he really was the only kid at that age that could play this part, who had, like I say, that kind of anger in him that he could project. And you'll see in the scene when he faces off against the junk man. See, this is an interesting example of how these kids interacted with each other and how they picked up the cues. This is one shot, basically. It's a Steadicam shot, and you can see how the timing works. And it's almost like a play, and they had to learn how to do this. It wasn't done in little bits and pieces. A lot of times with young actors, you have to do that in order to get them to get the performance. But we worked together so much beforehand, like I say, 2 weeks of rehearsal beforehand, and you see just the perfect timing where Jerry O'Connell comes in with the singing, and you watch how they stare him, and he backs off, and all of that. And this was all done in one shot here. And so the timing was great, and they really learned how to work with each other. My little boys, I have 2 little boys, 8 and 6. They always ask me, how do they do this scene with the guy doing the tattoo? They had a little bulb underneath this where he's holding his hand and he squirts the blood out. So it looks like he's digging into his arm, but he's actually squirting blood onto his arm. This backyard, we actually found this place up in Oregon, and it was pretty much the way you see it, except there was about 3 times as much junk in the backyard. We actually had to clean it up to make it look like this, because nobody would believe there was that many busted cars in the backyard. See, this is another example of how they're playing these scenes out without a lot of cuts, and it takes a lot of work with young actors to get them to listen to each other and to come in with the right timing. But these kids were unbelievably great. And you can see River Phoenix has, even at this very young age, had an amazing maturity about him. He had a lot of depth and a lot of wisdom. And it's so sad what happened to him, because he was a really enlightened soul in some ways, and in other ways he was just a kid who was confused. So it was a very, very sad thing that happened to him. This is arguments that we actually used to have. Who was stronger, Mighty Mouse or Superman? And we actually took all these conversations that we had and we put them right in the film. And so you have these 2 guys talking about very deep, important things, and the guys in the front talking about these very frivolous things. And the counterpoint, I think, is terrific. Here's the famous trestle scene. We shot this in Redding, California. And this trestle actually exists, and it's about 100 feet above the water. And it was very scary shooting up on this trestle. That was one of my favorite exchanges. Actually, I did quite a bit of writing on the film as well, and my friend Andy Scheinman also did a lot of writing. And his wit and intelligence and humor is evidenced in the screenplay as well as Ray and Bruce's. This sequence that you're about to see was a combination of using doubles, using the kids themselves. We did all kinds of long lenses, and we also used some process shots that we shot indoors to make it look like the train was bearing down on them. But it was one of the few sequences that in my history of my film career that I actually storyboarded and worked out ahead of time, because it was just too complicated to do just on the fly, which is the way I do most of my shot making. I just try to put a shot list together the day I'm shooting. But in the case of this sequence, we really did plan it out quite thoroughly to make sure we had every shot planned. This was done with a helicopter, and it was a beautiful place in Redding, California. These shots we did on a mock-up trestle that we put to the side over actual dry land. So we did some of those shots as well. This was shot, like I say, as a mock-up. This was shot inside a studio. It's a process shot, and there's a rear projection there. Again, this is another in-studio shot. This was shot with doubles, not with the real actors, but with doubles. This is shot with a very, very long 600 millimeter lens, and it looks like the train is right on top of them, but in fact, the train was not even entering the trestle, and the boys are on the other side of the trestle. That was also shot inside of a studio. But those shots where the train looks like it's right on top of them, the train was hundreds of yards away from them. This whole sequence we shot indoors because using minors, you can't really shoot very late at night, and we thought it would be much more production smart for us to shoot indoors. Oh, yeah, here we go. This is the Pine Contest. This scene we shot, and it went over huge with an audience, and even to this day I wrestle with the fact that I don't know if it was the best idea that we could have come up with for Gordy to tell them a story. It's a perfect 12-year-old story, you know, where barfing is at the center of it, but I always thought that Gordy, who ultimately would turn into a great writer someday, might tell a little bit more, I don't know, I guess even sophisticated story for a 12-year-old. But we settled on this story. This was the story that was in the book, and we shot it, and the audience loved it. And so I guess I basically felt we had to go along with it. We had a heck of a time coming up with just the right consistency for the barf. It ultimately became a blend of a large curd cottage cheese and blueberry pie filling. But we tried all kinds of different mixtures, and that was what we eventually came up with. And rigging the people to barf on everybody was also an interesting premise. This is one of the more interesting days of the shoot. At a certain point, you'll see where Lardass just is about to barf, the sounds that we created in order to, to assimilate the rumblings in his stomach. That was also an interesting combination of sounds where we took musical instruments, we took synthesizer instruments, and we actually put our own voices and lowered them through harmonizers and blended them all together and came up with this kind of half disgusting, half comedic stomach rumbling sound that you'll hear coming up. This was meant to feel cartoonish, this whole sequence. So you'll notice he takes out a bottle of castor oil, and the only thing that it says on it is castor oil. It doesn't look like anything that you would find in a store. And I always remember in those Little Rascals movies and all those things, whatever the thing they would take out was ant paste or castor oil, whatever it is. It just had the sign on it. It never looked like some prop department put it there, and I always wanted it to look like that in this case too, because this whole thing was supposed to be a story. Those timpani sounds were ones I always used to hear on the Jackie Gleason show. Whenever he was drunk, you'd hear these timpani sounds. Now this next sequence is we had nothing for this sequence, and we said we got to figure out something, anything that these boys would be talking about. What are the kind of conversations they'd be having if they were left alone? And Andy Scheinman and I came up with this the night before we shot this, the next day. This discussion of what was Goofy and what was he in relationship to Pluto, and that comes up in this. And then all these other observations were all things that we thought about. We thought about Pez and Wagon Train and $64,000 Question. We obviously laid these sounds in after we shot this, but in order for Jerry O'Connell to get that timing with the movement and all that, I stood off camera and did ribbit and woo and all that stuff to get him to make those gun movements. This next scene coming up is my favorite scene in the film, and it was an amazing performance here by River Phoenix. Also Will Wheaton. They're both terrific in the scene. But River, as you'll see at the end, he's able to break down and cry. We did it a couple of times. He wasn't able to do it. And I took him aside and did something that you would do with an adult actor and tell him, think about something that's personal to you at a time when an adult let you down and didn't live up to what you thought they would be and maybe lied to you. And what comes out, as you'll see in the end of the scene, is his performance that came right at the end of that little conversation I had with him. And he was crying pretty much after the scene, and I went over and held him and gave him a big hug and a kiss, and then he was better afterwards. This next scene was a very special moment too. It's a very quiet and serene moment in the film, but in reality, in order to get this deer that you're about to see to do what he was supposed to do, to look up, and first there was some food on the ground where the deer is eating some food, which he put. Then to get him to jerk up like that, we had these incredible loud air horns screaming to get him to look like that, and then we had to chase him across the track. So there was a lot of people off camera screaming and running around and doing all kinds of things to create this incredibly soft, serene moment in the film. Here again is that long lens. Gives us kind of that wavy look, that kind of nostalgic, distant look. This shot is one of my favorite shots in the whole film. It's something very poetic and beautiful about it. The whole notion of railroad tracks has a romance to it. And then the water tower there that's leaking, and just the beautiful setting there in Oregon. This was a process shot where there was a whole city behind those trees, and we took them out and painted in that little river that you see running through the trees. You'll be able to see it in the next shot coming up. Next couple of shots coming up. It was all done with process. A matte paint. It was a matte painting. You can see the river. There was a whole city back there, a town, a village. This sequence coming up where the boys try to cross this stream and they get the leeches on them. This is something that actually happened to Stephen King. The whole section where the leech gets stuck to his balls and all that, that's something that actually happened to Stephen King, and it was included in the novella, and we put it right in the film. The sleeper hold was actually something we used to see professional wrestlers do in the 50s, and they, for some reason you'd stick your thumb behind somebody's ear and that would put them to sleep. I don't know exactly how that worked, but it did in professional wrestling. I just love that line. That was a line that Andy Scheinman came up with. A lot of the funny lines in the film Andy came up with, but I never met anybody who fainted before. They never met anybody. They never saw a dead body either. And that's one of the beautiful things about young people, and that, you know, you just haven't experienced that many things. You're on the age of becoming a man and becoming a teenager, an older person, but you still haven't experienced a lot of life. I never heard that expression before in my life, cock knocker, but that was something that was also in the book. Stephen King had his own youth and his own background. He had some great phrases too that we used. There's a great story that goes with this that I'm going to share right now. It's going to take a while to tell, but it's worth telling. This whole sequence, we wanted it to be overcast and the wind blowing when they found the dead body. And that day was perfectly still. There was no overcast. It was a sunny day. We silked in virtually half of Oregon to get this overcast feel, and we brought in every wind machine, every fan in Hollywood up to make the wind blow and everything. And just when we were about to shoot the shot, we had monofilaments stuck to the bushes, and we had different production assistants holding onto the monofilaments to move the bushes. And on the widest shot, this shot here that you're about to see, there was a bush over in the corner, the right-hand side of the screen. If you look at it over there, you can see it. And it wasn't moving. And the machines were revving, and you couldn't hear yourself. And over a bullhorn, there was a woman named Carol Bonifil, and she was the one that was responsible for that bush over on the right-hand side of the screen. And just as the camera was rolling and the boys were coming down, I was saying, look, that bush is not moving. And the assistant director, Irby Smith, screamed at the top of his lungs over a bullhorn, and it's yelled, "Carol, yank your bush!" To make sure that it was all moving. And that, of course, stopped production for about 10 minutes. We were screaming so loud we couldn't move on. But in the midst of this incredibly serious moment, that funny thing happened. And then this scene that you're about to see was a very emotional scene, and I actually wrote this scene by myself in a hotel room, again, the night before we shot it. It was a very personal scene to me, and was all about a little boy not thinking that his father loved him, and was all upset, and was able to share his feelings with his friend and draw strength from his friend at a time when he was really questioning his own abilities and his own self-worth. And this is something I wrote by myself, and as I wrote it in my hotel room, I actually was crying as I wrote the scene. Now, here's an interesting thing coming up. In this sequence, when there's this standoff between the older boys and the younger boys about who's going to take credit for finding the body, you'll notice that at the climactic moment, Gordy picks up a gun and shoots it. Now, in the book, Chris was the one who had the gun, and Chris was the one who held them off with the gun. But we felt that since the focus of this story was really more about Gordy's character, and Gordy coming to grips with his own feelings of inadequacy and with a relationship to his father, and being made to feel good by the strength that he got from his friends, this really was about Gordy finding his own strength. And so we chose to have Gordy pick up the gun and hold the older boys off. And this was an idea that Andy Scheinman again came up with. And interestingly enough, when Stephen King first saw the film, he watched it privately. We were all nervous about how he would react to it. And after the screening, he couldn't talk. He was speechless about it, and he had to go away, and came back a half hour later and said it was the best thing he had ever seen of any of his books up till that point that had been adapted to film. And he said it was so emotional because it was so personal to him. This was his life. And he said, and the one thing that you did which really knocked me out was that the fact that you had Gordy pick up the gun, which is something I never would have thought of. It was so much better than what I had in the book. And what a great feeling it was as a filmmaker to know that Stephen King not only felt good about what had been done on film, but actually even felt better than some of the things that he had written in his book. Here we have all the boys saying goodbye to each other. And we didn't have a really good payoff to Vern here. And Ray Gideon, on the day right there as we were shooting, said, "What if he finds a penny in the street?" And I thought, oh, that was perfect. It was a perfect grace note to his character, the one who had been looking for his pennies. And what he gets out of this trip is he finds a penny. This next sequence where Gordy and Chris say goodbye is one of the saddest, and it's very hard for me to look at this sequence because Chris, played by River Phoenix, was always the character in the film. He was a peacemaker, and he was the one that kind of brought the gang together. And as you'll hear in the voiceover, the way he dies in the fiction of the film is in service of being a peacemaker. And in real life, he was very much that same way. He was the one who was the, kind of the soul of this group of four guys. And, he had to die in such a tragic way. And every time I look at this last shot as we see Chris's character fade out off the screen, it is just so ironic and sad and weird and eerie and all of those things that River Phoenix would die, well before his time.